Buenas noches a todo el mundo y bienvenidos a la presentación de esta noche. Si desea escuchar la presentación en español, por favor, ubícase al fondo de su pantalla y ahí verás un globito. Empuje el globito que tiene, que dice Interpretation. Una vez que ha empujado el globito, puede escoger Spanish para escuchar la presentación en español. Si se está conectando tras un móvil, simplemente empuje los tres puntitos. De allá escoge Interpretation, pues Spanish, pues Done. Y ya estás listo para escuchar. Bienvenidos y espero que disfrute.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. Well, Karla, before we get started, I want to just do some housekeeping. So this is part of the Six Bridges Book Festival put on by CALS, which is a Central Arkansas Library System. And tonight's program is sponsored and honors JN High School. In 1902, high school's family bought controlling interest of the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, or the Arkansas Gazette, and became editor. He served on the library board from that year until his death, and was issued the first library card. The avid reader and collector of Arkansas history material only stopped going to the office at age 99. Tonight's lecture honors Mr. High School's commitment and excellence to journalism, as well as support to the library. So thank you to that. And also, Karla, before we begin, I want to just give a huge shout out to all my friends at Central Arkansas Library System. They, over the past couple of years, have made a really strong effort to serve the growing Hispanic population here in Little Rock and in Pulaski County and all of Central Arkansas, really. And how this all came about, they reached out to me and said, hey, we really want the book festival to be representative of the community. Do you have any people that you would recommend for this? And I said, do I? And I said, guys, if you listen to me one time and one time only, let it be this time. I just finished reading this amazing book, The Undocumented Americans, and you got to reach out. And they did, and here we are. I didn't know that they were going to pick me to moderate it, which is a little intimidating, honestly. I think they got my name from the bottom of a barrel and said, you're doing it, but here I am. So welcome, everyone. Karla, before we get into the book, I'm just so fascinating, and I'm just a huge fan of your work and your writing. I started with the book and then have read every essay you've probably written. How did you get into writing, and kind of what was it, reading first? Kind of give us the genesis of your craft.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for all the really sweet words. I'm really happy to be here. I wish I could be there in person. I started writing. I mean, I honestly guess because I was good at it, and I was really bad at other subjects at school. But I obviously loved to read. I didn't like books that were aimed at children. I always felt like they talked down to children. And I liked some authors that wrote for children, like C.S. Lewis. Like I really love the Chronicles of Narnia, but those are obviously like those are all for adults also. And once you're an adult, you realize that they're not exactly, they have other meanings too. But I quickly sort of I guess I really don't know. I mean, I was good at writing, and then I think when I was in high school, I just started writing about music, which is what got me started writing professionally when I was around 15 years old. And at the time, it was a way for me, growing up in like a Latin household, which was very strict, pretty religious. Where I was not like, there was not in New York City, if you want to hang out, with your friends, or if you want to do stuff, for me, the choices were kind of like, either do church stuff or do like extracurricular activities. And so what I ended up doing were these music writing classes. And I figured out that I could go to shows for free if I wrote about them. So I went down that path. And then I just started going to like music shows and theater shows and writing about them. And because I was good at it, I was able to get published pretty quickly. And so I it's nothing romantic about it, because when you're at that age, you don't really have a lot to say, right? It's sort of like when you get older, you start writing because you have things to say. But at that age, honestly, I did it because I was good at it and I got attention for it.
Why do you think you're good at it? Is it something that just comes natural to you, or have you just worked at this craft for so long?
I mean, I think there's both. Like sometimes I have like young people who say that they love to write, and I say like, well, I think you have to have like a talent, which I think has to do with like a sense of rhythm. For me, there's like, I'm not really inspired by a lot of writers who write books outside of writers that I've loved for a long time, but I am inspired by music and by songwriters. So I think it has to do with like a sense of rhythm, of how sentences go together and paragraph structure and all of that. You have to have a sense of that. I also think it's important for writers to have something to say. So I think what makes me a good writer is that I have something that I've always had, which sometimes is harmful, which is that I have an unwillingness to say things that have been said before in the same ways that they've been said before. So I'm always looking to write a sentence that hasn't been written before, or to describe something in a way that it hasn't been described before. And because I write, predominantly about people that have been maligned or written as stereotypes, that ends up being pretty politically powerful, because I'm like, I need to write this person that has been hated or that has been written in a really caricatured way, in a way that it hasn't been written before. And so that when I do that, people end up really responding to it. So I think that is something that people who make art should have at the forefront of their minds, which is not only am I good at this in terms of skill, but do I have something to contribute?
That's awesome. So one of the reasons I'm so passionate about being involved with the Central Arkansas Library System, and I'll give you a little background about me so you can know the stranger that's asking you these invasive questions. I'm an immigrant. One of the reasons I love your book so much is for a long time I was undocumented. Was fortunate over the years to get my green card and become a citizen now, but I grew up undocumented most of my life. And your ability to write what I lived and what so many DACA kids have lived is just incredible. It's so refreshing and so real. But the reason I love literature and the reason I probably ended up doing good in school was that I had a local library like 2 blocks from the street. And I remember growing up as a kid and riding my bike in the summer and like with one hand and a giant stack of books. So I ask you, did you have a close relationship with your public library in New York? I know they've got some great public libraries there. Or just how did you get your books growing up?
I think a lot of us who, came from backgrounds that didn't have access in some kind of way have like a really intimate relationship with public libraries. Like and then who ended up being successful. Like we tend to have that in common. It's not just books. Like you don't have to be a big reader. Like some of us like went to the public library as, a refuge for, because they had air conditioning in the summer, or because it was a safe place to go after school while parents were working, or because there was internet access, or because they had printers. It's such it's such an incredible thing for children who grow up not at the same starting line as their peers, just in terms of basic having to do homework, right? So of course, yeah, the public library was very important to me. One of my first, I have a really bad memory for various reasons. But one of my like first memories of America for some reason is my dad taking me to one of the branches of the Brooklyn Public Library, which I think was in Williamsburg, which stands out in my mind, whether it's real or imagined, because of the role of the Williamsburg library in A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, and us just me walking out with like a huge pile of books. And at the time, it was also books on tape, books on cassette, which I think was really helpful in helping me just intake as many words as possible. And I don't remember working on my accent, but I'm sure it was instrumental in helping me lose my accent, or, and yeah, I mean, and also it was how I was able to, I mean, really get acquainted with the canon, which, like, I went to Harvard and I did study literature at Harvard. But, you can't, like, again, you can't just start getting acquainted with American literature at 18 years old with your peers who've gone to prep school. Like, again, you're not starting at the same place. So I'd already read all of that stuff by myself because every weekend there was no place for us to go. Also, there was no money to go places. So we went to the library every single Saturday as a family, and we went to our respective sections. My brother went to comics. My mom went to the magazines and to the interior decorating. My dad went to, like, biographies, nonfiction, and I went to novels. And so I felt really prepared by the time I was at Harvard in terms of literature. And one of the first things I did when I got my first book advance, I donated to, like, immigration causes that I felt passionate about. I paid off my parents' bills, and I became a patron of the Queens Public Library.
That's incredible. And I love what you said about it's more than just a place to get books. I'm really proud of the leadership that we have at our library with Nate and Nate Coulter. He's the executive director, and the whole board. We've got programs that you can go check out, Power Tools, at one of our libraries. We've hired a Hispanic outreach liaison that focuses on bringing the library to the Hispanic community in ways that probably no other libraries do. And I think Maria's on the call, so she's here. But you're so right that, they're so important for our communities because, whereas, and I grew up in, so Little Rock, when we moved here, it was lily white. I mean, there wasn't any Hispanics at that time, and it's gotten more Hispanic over time. But I was literally the only Hispanic kid at my elementary school. And the scariest day of my life, Karla, was when my mom put me on the school bus. And I didn't speak English because we spoke Spanish at home. And I just remember sitting down in that bus thinking, yeah, I was like, what am I going to do when I get to school? And when I get to school, the first day, my ESL teacher was right there, like in front of the bus. She just held my hand, and I felt like an angel just put, like, her wings over me, and learned English in 6 months because I was 5. But you said something that's very important, in how you would go to the library and everybody would go to their sections. As a Hispanic person growing up in the South, going to libraries, I feel like every time I read a book, I was seeing through a window, right? I was seeing someone else's life. I was seeing someone else's perspective. For the first time in my life, when I picked up your book, I felt like I was seeing in a mirror. I could actually see my family. I could see my stories. And that's why I think your book has touched so many people, and your incredible writing. So I guess we can jump into the book now. And I kind of want to ask you, how did you pick the subjects? And I will add, out of all the cities you pick, you didn't pick any city in the South. And that's not a critique, that's just an observation. Why is that?
Well, I technically did do Florida.
Well, yeah. I mean, like the real South.
The real South. Yeah, that's a bone you all have to pick with Florida. So I'll answer the first part first, which is, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think that I've always had, like, a complicated relationship to the issue of, being Latina and writing about it and having to talk about it. And when I decided to be, I kind of fell into being a writer, and I was just kind of like, the thing that would make this, people ask me about the American dream a lot. And most of the time I refuse to answer it because I'm just like, leave me alone, But I thought that I kind of, like, in my heart of hearts, I felt that the American dream really would be being able to just live my life and do whatever I wanted and follow my dreams, but not having had to do what my parents did, which was give up their entire lives for me. And I didn't want to have to give up my entire lives for them, or have to give up like my entire life to the idea of like immigration, or to 11 million undocumented people who I shared a status with, but who I didn't know. And, you know, going to college, I felt like there was such there wasn't DACA at the time. And so I didn't really have a possibility like in my head of thinking, what do I want to do? I just took classes and I didn't know where I was going. I thought I was going to end up working with my dad at his restaurant. It wasn't not his restaurant, but where he worked. And so when it was time, I was in grad school and I was just living day by day and I was writing, but it was really the election in 2016 where you heard all of this stuff about immigrants that was really hurtful. You know, it was really hurtful to hear, you know, his voice on the news, and to hear and to see the way that I saw it affected the body language of people that I knew, you know, of like Latin people that I knew, like the way that they just walked with their heads down a little bit and they just seemed hurt and down and embarrassed. And I thought, like, the writing that like you said, like I'd never read something where I felt like I looked in the mirror and saw myself back the way that I thought of myself, which was like real human, complicated, proud, badass. Like it was just always some kind of propaganda. And so I thought I have to write it, right? And the question of the South was honestly because I wrote it between 2016 and 2020. And I have a green card now, but at the time I was undocumented and it was the Trump years. And there were some places where I was scared to go, you know? So there was, you know, there's a lot of reporting that takes place in the Northeast. And when I went to, when I took planes at all, I was scared, you know, and I wrote my lawyer's name number down on my hand in marker, and I made a list of people and their phone numbers that my partner could call if I was detained. So, you know, there were some, and obviously this is no secret to you, but growing up in New York, the image that I get of the South is what the news tells me, that, you know, the South is like Trump voters. And I thought I was going to get hurt. And so when when my book was published, and then when I learned who was reading my book, and I learned who my audience was, and I found that it was people across the entire country, and I saw that it was people who were undocumented, documented, children of immigrants. There's a reader that I have that's a big fan, who lives in the South, who lives in Texas, I believe, who has she's 60, and her parents were migrants, and they've been here for a really long time. I know I have a reader whose family has been here since the 1600s, and she's also, you know, in the South. I didn't know who my audience was until the book was published.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, and the reason I brought that up is, you know, we could have landed anywhere in America when we moved here. We didn't have any ties. And I tell people any chance I get that the biggest break my family and I ever got was the fact that we landed in Arkansas. Because every dream we've ever had, we've been able to fulfill it here. But it's this dissonance, right? Because, and I mean, you talk about scared. We live in a state that I think voted for Trump 64% each time. But I remember my mom calling me the day after the election was over, and she was just crying. She's like, "What are we going to do?" And I think it's easy to forget for a lot of folks, especially those that, you know, white folks that aren't undocumented, that don't have a connection to it. It's just like, oh, well, it'll just go by in 4 years. But for a lot of us, I mean, the trauma that we suffered and the way that our community was just dehumanized. It just was real tough. So I think your book, is that what really kind of made you say, I'm taking pen to paper and I'm going to write this book?
Yeah, it was just it was a genuine fear, but it was also I'm really good in crisis mode, you know? So it's like I always whenever there's a crisis, I always say that I'm just like Tom Cruise scaling up a building in those Mission Impossible movies. So it was sort of like the dread was the months building up to the election, hearing all the rhetoric and hearing the comparisons to animals and to rats and to cockroaches, and sometimes reading comment sections where it was like, shoot them or whatever. But it was the night of the election that I was like, well, this is a crisis and it's going to be bad. Like, and my dad called me that night and he was like, Armageddon is here. You know, they're religious people, and they really did think that this was the end times, because they knew that it would mean certain death for a lot of people, not just us. And, you know, for lots of communities, it would be a lot of hurt. And so the morning after, I described this in the book, but the morning after at like 5 a.m., I had to go to New Jersey because I was profiling this oceanographer for a magazine. And I could have canceled, but I was like, nope, I'm going to be like a boy reporter and just going to do this story. And we were going to take like a boat on the Hudson. And I was like, don't tell me that we have to go past the Statue of Liberty. Like, this is going to seem fake. And this oceanographer was Chilean, and Jewish Chilean, and his grandparents, I think, or maybe parents, had fled Nazi Germany and had been rejected from America, had been turned away from America, and Chile had accepted them. And so he didn't want to talk about the election. We didn't talk about the election. We were all stunned. It was like 6 a.m. and we were on the Hudson. And yeah, we went right by the Statue of Liberty, like right underneath on the speeding boat. I did not know how to swim. And he just, I just knew that his parents had seen this symbol and I had seen the symbol. And all of us had at some point, immigrants had seen this symbol. And we all had some relationship to it, we all had some kind of relationship to it. And it just really felt like a sign. And I emailed my agent that day and I was like, I have to write this book.
Incredible. Well, I'm so glad you did, because like I said, it's a book, and that, I feel like you've got a lot of audiences, right? I think the most impactful one is, the undocumented kids, or even just the Hispanics that are born here or that, aren't undocumented. But also I think your portrayal of the undocumented of our community is so important, because a lot of the times when Americans talk about our community, it's like, oh, they're super hardworking and they work for cheap, and you're pretty quick to call them out on that BS. It's like, hey, like, we're more complex than that, but also, like, as you say, the American dream doesn't really exist for them, because and you can say it way better than I can, but when they come here, they're young and they're idealistic, and then this country chews them up and spits them out because they work those jobs. So kind of touch on that. How did you find your voice, or how did you pick the subjects to share that side of the American dream, right? Because everybody loves the guy that pulls himself up from the bootstraps, got a degree or opens a business and now he's successful. And I feel like you and I may fall into that a lot of the times when they think of successful Hispanic folks. You obviously will more than me, but I mean, and I struggle with that sometimes, because growing up and working my way to school, I worked in restaurants, and the stories you chronicle are the ones that I know, right? I still know people like that today. And you're right, for them, the American dream is dead. It's got to be more than that. So if you can just touch on that.
Yeah, I think you and I have seen, which is people that we love and that we've seen go from like young to old, and they've always had these like dreams of opening up businesses or going back to school, or they really never stopped dreaming until they die or until their like spirit dies. And that's a hard thing to watch happen over and over and over. And there was something in me where I was like, I knew that a lot of people were really excited by the sight of me, being like this young, pretty girl who had gone to Harvard and Yale and had published everywhere, in every publication. And I would have been a very good like brand ambassador for the American dream. And what I just wanted to say is what you're saying, which is like, you don't know the people that in some way on whose shoulders I stand, because those were the people in my community who were always like encouraging me, like telling me like, show me your report card. How's it going at school? You're so smart, giving me Christmas presents. Who were always the people whose praise I wanted, who I wanted to make proud, not necessarily my parents, but just people in my community. And to see them just really be idealistic. And it wasn't the dreamers that I thought of, but it was just the older folks. And so I wanted to write about them as just a kind of eulogy, because I didn't want to talk shit about the American dream out of respect for them, because they believed in it. They came here because they believed in it, and they continued believing in it. And so many of them wanted to live it through their children. And a lot of them wanted to live it through me when I met them. They would be so proud of me. And they still are. I did an event in New York yesterday, maybe 2 days ago. And it was an event with a lot of academics, and it was for an event with a lot of young students. And then there was this, I think he was a custodian who came up to me from Colombia, and he took one of my books and he came up to me, and my second last name is Villavicencio. And he was like, there's a town in Colombia called Villavicencio. And he wanted me to sign his book because he was proud of me. And I'm sure you've had these experiences where there are just like these strangers who just are really happy that you're doing okay, because it goes against the propaganda that people have told about us, that we're lazy, that we're good for nothing, that we're just not human. And so, I feel like I exist for myself, but I also exist to give relief and to be a symbol for whatever I need to be a symbol for my community, to keep them sustained. I am not a symbol for a state or for a country or for a government. I am a symbol for whoever spirit needs sustaining. And so that is why the book focuses so much on like aging immigrants.
Karla, that's incredible. That gave me chills. I want to ask you two questions, and they're related. One, do you struggle with your success sometimes? And by that I mean like, and I ask you because I think I do sometimes. And I'm not successful, but I've gone up a couple rungs in my career, and sometimes it weighs on me. It's like, why me, right? Why me and not someone else? But also when I see the community, they say things like, oh, keep going. So I want to ask you that pointing question. Do you struggle with it, and how do you deal with that struggle? And then the other one is, let's go with that one first. I really want to hear your feedback, because a lot of the times, well, here's what I was going to say. Do you struggle with your sex? And then the other one is, what I love about what you're doing is you're changing the perception of when they think of a Latinx up and coming, right? I think when the country writ large thinks of Hispanics, they think of, really hard construction workers or masonry workers or, field migrants. But now we can say we've got double Ivies because of you, or we've got National Book Award finalists because of you. And I think representation is so important because, and I don't think you'll like this comment because they're super humble, but what you're doing for all those kids out there in schools right now that see, your name on all these lists and see that you went to Harvard, I think they're going to say, well, if Karla can, I can too. Yeah, I'll let you take it from there.
Well, I mean, I think you are successful and you should stop saying that you're not. But one of the things that I like to do is I like to, so obviously I mean, I am confident in like things that I am like, in like my work, but I also like to perform confidence the way that like a rapper would, because it is not expected of people like us. And it rubs a lot of people the wrong way, but it serves a purpose. It's sort of like performance art. So I did a piece for This American Life last year where I said, I mentioned that I went to Harvard, and I said, I mean, I didn't experience culture shock. It was my birthright. And people were very angry because they said I wasn't grateful. So now going to any school is not a birthright. There's no birthright to anything. Like, I'm not stupid. But the question that I get asked maybe the most is, next to, my thoughts on the American dream, is whether or not I have imposter syndrome. And the expectation is that I do. And so I like to say, no, like, why would I, and so I thought it was sort of like it was just a bold thing to say, but people were very upset that I was not grateful. And people were saying that I should be like personally grateful to, America for giving me a Harvard education or things like that. So I maybe you can't do that performance art, but I like to, it's extremely hard for me to kind of keep the moving the line of what like professional markers are going to make me feel happy and fulfilled, because those things are not going to make me happy and fulfilled. It's like obviously going to be like being at peace with myself and accepting myself for who I am, which is something that every person struggles with. And so for, when I was a child, it really was like being published in the New Yorker. And then when that happened, I was just like, well, what else is there to live for? And then I keep moving it. And then if it happens, I feel sad. If it doesn't happen, I would feel devastated. And I think that is just because when I was young, the thing that would make me happy were my grades, my academic accomplishments, because they made my parents happy. And I thought that the only way that I could relieve my parents of any pain, and I could like sort of make up for the humiliation that they experienced in the outside world, or I could make up for the racism or for the wage theft or for the poverty, was with my grades. So, that was the experience of growing up. And so now I'm like, the only thing that can bring me happiness is just like constant achievement. So
I love that. That's to our gain. You keep getting those achievements because they're for you, but they're also for us as a community.
You're like, never find happiness.
One of the things that I loved about your book, in each of the chapters, you never asked them, or at least you didn't write about it, you never asked them why they came to America. And I thought that was really interesting, but also great because, I mean, I kind of don't like that question when they ask it to me or to my family or to another immigrant, because to me, it's kind of like a smell test. It's like, well, why are you here? It's like you had to earn the right. Like if you don't have this amazing sob story that you were fleeing persecution, then you're not worthy of being here, right? So can you touch on that?
Yeah, it's exactly it. I just feel like all of us sort of feel like we have a right to judge how good someone's reason is for having come here. And I feel like, God, not only is most people's journey here like horrible, but just making a life here is insane. Like, people don't understand. Like, yeah, come to a new country. Most people that I know start working with like zero English within days. Some people I know start working the day they arrive. They get a new apartment in a new place where they know nobody. Get a new apartment with like no lease within days. Like, I asked them, like, what is your first meal in America? Because that's interesting. Like, and some people are like, a bag of chips and a water, you know? But yeah, I think like we're all kind of just like sitting in our chairs and being like, this person saw that their mother be raped and killed and tortured by a gang. That seems like a good reason for coming here and living in Philadelphia with me. Like, that's bullshit, you know? So I don't ask. Also, people really like border crossing stories. And I'm like, why? You know, crossing the border is hard. It's a fucking desert. You know, why do you need to know these details of people's blisters on their feet? Like, it makes you a psychopath, I think.
Karla, one of my, there's a quote by Ernest Hemingway. He says, "There is nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed." So do you always bleed when you write, or do you write for, I mean, because like your book is just super personal, and I mean, it's a story on it's a story on undocumented Americans, but it's also part memoir. Tell me about, you know, some of your other writings, or is that just kind of your style?
Yeah, I do. I write in the first person. I look up to essayists, obviously, like any, like always, it's so embarrassing, but like any, like just basic bitch, and, you know, in her early 30s, early 20s, I like admire Joan Didion and Maggie Nelson, and nobody's ever compared me to Leslie Jamison, but I consider her a peer. Yeah, it's hard. I've figured out better boundaries with my own brain and how much access I give myself to it while I write. And it's also hard because it's not like, you know, obviously it's not like it's not like you can leave it. You know, it's like I'm writing and then I can't just like close my computer and be like, okay, well, now I can leave those thoughts or leave that mood that I'm in. So my partner and I have been really good about like working at making sure that some things stay on the page, but I've gotten better at it. While I was writing the book, I was not skillful at it. I would get to, you know, I would intentionally trigger myself by looking at photographs, by listening to certain songs, by drinking. I had like Google alerts for ICE and immigration. I would read like upsetting things about immigration to sort of get myself in that headspace. And well, one, I'm taking a break from writing about immigration right now. Two, I'm working on a novel. Three, I have a really good therapist right now. Also, I'm not drinking anymore. So all those things have helped me. I also have a friend who's an older writer. He's in his 60s. And he was basically like, there's no longevity if you keep that up, right? You can't have like a career that spans decades if you kill yourself each time you do that, you know, each time you write something. Like Hemingway did not live a happy life, nor did he die in a good way. And the thing is, like, you know, unlike him, like you said, like I do have a lot of young people who look up to me. And part of what we have experienced is that we have all of this trauma, right? And intergenerational trauma. And if I kind of have to model, and I wish that I didn't know about this, but a lot of them look up to me. And if I kind of just like wrote and drank myself to death and just lost my mind writing really painful things, they'd kind of lose hope, that somebody could do it, could like live the life that I've had and suffered the way I had. And yet, I want to prove that you can survive this, right? So I want to write all of this, but I also want to stay healthy, and I want to be happy, and I want to live a long life.
Well, I'm gonna read a small excerpt from the book, because I've read this book so many times, but these two sentences, I mean, shook me. I felt like I was writing them, and I think, and I'll just read it. It says, "A twisted inversion that many children of immigrants know is that at some point your parents become your children. Your own personal American dream becomes making sure they age and die with dignity in a country that never wanted them." I sent that to my sister because I'm 30 now. My parents are starting to get older, and we're starting to live that. My mom had a cancer scare last year. I mean, it was cancer, but they detected early. And you juxtapose our experience with, probably some of my Anglo counterparts whose parents have a 401k and great insurance and a retirement and all that. And then our experience, which was like, my parents didn't have health care, and what do we do? Have you gotten a lot of feedback from this particular point? Because I feel like regardless of your socioeconomic status, any children of an immigrant, you kind of feel that. And I think it's also like cultural, right? Like nursing homes don't exist in Mexico, which is where we're from. Like you just take your parents in. So what spurred that sentence? Was it your personal experience or what you saw?
Sorry, my belly's rumbling. Yeah, it was both. It was that I spoke to children of immigrants that I knew and that I also met. And I was like, what are you struggling with? And a lot of them was just like trying to manage having lives and careers, and also like being on the phone with their parents, and like just trying to figure everything out for them, and also working and knowing that like they were working because at the back of their minds, like they had to retire their parents, which is a crazy thought to think about. Like they had to retire their parents. And the thoughts that we talked with, amongst ourselves was like, will they go back to their home countries? I mean, it's cheaper there, but will they like be able to live independently? Will they move in with me? Like my brother's a dead weight, like my sister has kids, like it just all of these thoughts that my friends and I have had since we were teenagers. When I talk in the book about my brother and call us like the heir and the spare, for those of us who have siblings, there's always been like okay, well, you're the smart one. You're the one who's good with mom and dad. So you are going to pay for them. And then you're going to live with mom and dad, and you're going to take care of them, right? There's just always been this like openness, this kind of like crass openness about how are we going to deal with mom and dad when they're dying and they have zero money. So I needed to write about that. And yeah, there's been so much conversation. People are so glad that that's out in the open and we can talk about it amongst ourselves. There's no answer. There's nothing to do about it. That's the reality. And it's just nice to be able to, to be able to read it and be able to be like, we're not crazy. This is real. This is happening to us. And yeah. to know that we're not the only ones that are living through it.
So Karla, we've got 10 minutes left, and I kind of want to deviate from the book and kind of just talk about what's in the future for you. I mean, your first book really set the bar high, obviously, for your next one. Are you going to continue to write on this topic, or are you going to focus more on music? You said you're working on a novel. Do you feel like at this point it's even possible for you to step away from this conversation just because of what a fantastic job you did, but also just your talent and the platform that you've created for yourself?
That's a good question. Sometimes I feel like people are like wrong about something. And so then I feel like I have to step in and say something, so so I'm sure I'm gonna return to writing about this in some way. I just need a break right now. Um, but the novel that I'm writing is um, about a teenage girl who is undocumented. And while the novel is like not an immigration novel, it is about an undocumented girl, and it is about her dad and about her relationship with her dad, and growing up in New York. It's like a coming of age novel. But, again, sort of like, I think you and I both know that like when you grow up and you're like a teenager and you're undocumented, first thing you are is a teenager. And it's not like you wake up in your morning and like, you go downstairs and you're like, I wonder what, ICE is doing today. And just, you are a teenager, you have your relationship with your parents, you have like your crushes, you have school, you have all of these things. But then the way that immigration kind of had influenced my life, at least, was like it influenced the dynamics I had with my dad, because it was like, well, he was sacrificing for me, and so it sort of influenced the dynamics. It influenced the dynamics I had with my mom. It influenced how I did at school, how I viewed myself. It influenced my relationship, my dating life, because of how I related to just everything. It influenced how I viewed things. But like immigration itself wasn't like I was like, wondering what it meant to be an immigrant or something, which is what I always found really interesting when people write from the perspective of young immigrants. And obviously I came of age at a time when DACA didn't exist, and the idea of like dreamers as kind of like a brand didn't exist, and like the idea of like undocujoy didn't exist. So my protagonist is kind of refusing that. And so I'm really excited for like kids who are immigrants to have like a novel of their own, to be just like, yeah, this is what it's like to be a teenager and an immigrant and a daughter and a kid of immigrants. Where it's like, yeah, these experiences are true to what it's like, but where it's not like, where it's not so, where you're not hit over the head with it in a way that's like reading a Wikipedia page. So
Karla,
yeah, in ways I'm working on it, but it's sort of like done in a little bit of a different way.
that's incredible. I can't wait for it to come out. Obviously, we're going to invite you to come back to this book festival and promote it, hopefully in person, because I'd love to show you Arkansas. I tell people this all the time: Little Rock is America's best kept secret, and we do a good job of keeping it that way. So hopefully
Yeah,
you
I'd
can come
love
down.
to.
What you were talking about that book, and when did you find out you were undocumented? And what was that day like?
I think it was around like 8th grade. It was around then. I don't remember the exact day, but I was applying. It was around a time when I was applying to like contests, like sweepstakes kind of things, and they asked for a social, and I was like, "What's my social?" And it was like, "You don't have a social," and I was like, "Why?" And they were like, "Because you're undocumented," and I was like, "Okay." It didn't at that age mean anything. And then when it came to applying to high school, it was also like looking at forms and stuff. And I was like, I thought that somehow for me, it meant something different than for like my dad. But then I remember that the Dream Act came to be. We're around the same age. I'm 32. And my dad was like, the Dream Act is going to 100% pass, when you're in high school, because there's bipartisan support.
Yeah.
John McCain supports it. And I was 100% sure that it was going to pass. That's what I thought it was. I thought it was like a bureaucratic issue. I thought it meant I didn't have a social security number, and that, if John McCain supported it, it was going to pass.
Well, it's so funny, Karla. It was the same issue. It was 2009. I'll never forget it, because I was a senior in high school, and My experience was the exact same. I went to go get my driver's license. And I was like, Ma, that made me seguro. I'm going to go get my driver's license. And she kept putting it off. She's like, oh, luego te lo doy. Like, okay.
No.
Luego. And she kept putting it off. And finally I was like, Mom, give me my social. She was like, siéntate. And I was like, oh my God. And I was like, ¿qué? She's like, no tienes papeles. And I was like, ya valió. I was like, what? My world. I just remember like my world crashing
No,
down.
you knew what that meant, though. You knew what that because you were
Yeah.
enough to. Yeah.
Yeah, because like we had uncles and like they worked under the table and got paid cash. And because I was brought here as a little kid, kind of like you, I was like, oh, that's them. That's not me, right? I'm as
Yeah.
American as apple pie,
Right.
and not on paper. And it was 2009, and the Dream Act, the vote was right when I was going to go to college. And just like you, I was optimistic. I read everything I could, and it failed by 2 votes. And both Arkansas senators, Mark Pryor and Blanche Lincoln, voted against it. And I mean, I still get like, I just saying that out loud made me sick to my stomach because they said they were going to support it, but again, the Obamacare was about to pass, and they couldn't vote for both of them apparently for political reasons. And that day changed my life because that's when really kind of put me, to get involved locally and change the perspective. But that's one question that I always ask folks that were undocumented or undocumented, because it's always the exact same story. Like, you think you're here, you're fine, and then your world's changed in an instant.
Well, I'm really proud of you and everything that you've done since that day, because a lot of people would sort of retreat into themselves and just feel angry at their parents and angry at the world and angry at their communities, not just like other Latinos, but also at Arkansas and at, everyone who wasn't Hispanic, and just be like, you're hurting me, but you retreated into community and activism and into giving back to your community, which is really remarkable.
Oh, thanks. And I know you don't want to get into policy, and I'm not going to get into that, but I do want to ask kind of what's the reason why you shy away from it, or you don't want to touch the subject. And if you don't want to answer, tell me to shut up, but I wanted to at least ask that.
I mean, the reason why I don't talk about it is for a political reason, which is that, well, you read the book, and it's like a literary work, right? It's a literary work, and I'm working on a novel now. But when I was first started to do events, like this is a book festival, but when I first started to do the events for my book, the events that I kept getting asked to do were like to go on CNN and to talk about what I thought about like the new immigration proposal. And I was like, I don't know. Like, I know the same thing that like, ask a person from the street to know, like, I read like what smart people are saying. And if they make a good points, I'm like, yes, that's smart. And then if someone else makes a good point, I'm like, you know what? That person's smart. I don't have like a policy mind. I'm an artist. Like, I'm weird. I paint dogs, and I send like, I paint dog portraits. Like, don't trust me. Like, I'm an artist, like I'm, like I support, immigration reform. I want there to be legalization for everyone. Every people obviously know my politics, but there's just this idea that artists, when they are people of color, are kind of like inherently political beings, and that my thoughts are somehow like,
Yeah.
I'm just like, just let artists, it's sort of like it's like a political resistance on my point, to be like, ask me about my book, ask me about my influences, ask me about, what led to this. Because I could go on Rachel Maddow, but do you really want me to go on Rachel Maddow? Because I won't behave.
I want to see you on Tucker Carlson.
I told my publicist, I was like, if you put me on Rachel Maddow, that's on you. And they were like, we absolutely do not want you on Rachel Maddow, because they know I won't behave. So,
Karla, we've got 4 minutes now. I'm just going to take a point of personal privilege here and just say thank you for your voice. Thank you for your craft, for just the testicular fortitude that you have. I mean, the way you write, you're so authentic. And I think that's why people love your writing, and you're so talented. I would say, finish off with this. What advice would you have to someone that is undocumented or that wants to go to Yale or Harvard, I would love for the last couple minutes just to be addressed to them, because again, representation is so important, and for a lot of them, you're kind of the one person that has been so successful. So I'll let you finish off with that.
I would say, well, I'll address the imposter syndrome thing, which I think is a good answer to this question. I would say just think about, I will say this in a very inappropriate metaphor. My dad, when it was time for me to think about applying to colleges, I would be like, I don't know where to go. They're not going to accept me. And he would be like, I can't translate this into English in a very elegant way, but he would be like a good fighting rooster. In Latin America, they do cockfights. I don't support that, but he was like, a good fighting rooster is a good fighting rooster in any cockfight. And so he was like, you're smart here in Brooklyn, in Queens. We know you're smart in this home. Like we think you're a genius. You're going to be a genius at Harvard. And a teacher, a white man in my high school told me, you're a big fish in a small pond here at Harvard. You're going to be a small fish in a big pond. But I wasn't. I was a big fish in a big pond at Harvard. And so you're fine. Trust yourself, trust your brain, trust your hard work, trust what you've learned at home. You've probably learned really good work ethic. You've probably learned to not give up. You've probably learned to put, all you have into your work. Trust that. Apply where you want to apply. Put in the work. Like, you're golden everywhere you go. Like, you're quality. You're a good rooster in any cockfight.
How does he say it in Spanish?
I don't remember. I just remember being like, that's weird. He used a lot of metaphors. I don't even remember, man.
In Mexico, we have one that says, "El que es perico, donde quieras verde." Like, if you're good, you're good, and that's just.
Well, there you go. That's the advice I have.
So, Karla, when does your book come out? Your next novel?
I as soon as I finish writing it.
Well, perfect. We'll leave it there. And seriously, whenever it does come out, I don't speak on behalf of cows, but I'll raise a bunch of hell like I did this time to get you back, because I'd love to see you in person and would love to have you come here and promote the book and just keep doing what you're doing. So thank you so much for your time and your voice.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'd love to visit. Good night, everyone.